The mushrooms said, and I'm sure you'll be horrified at this, the mushrooms said to me in the Amazon when they were revealing all this information and deputizing us to do all these things, that we said, why us? Why should we be, the ambassador of an alien species into human culture? And they said, because you have never believed anybody, because you have never given over your belief to anyone. In 1971, I was 23, my brother was 19. I'd spent several years in Asia already, having been run out of Berkeley because of the revolution. And we were graduates of the LSD revolution, but it had left us wanting more, specifically wanting the kinds of experiences that the classical commentators on psychedelics described. And by that I mean people like Havelock Ellis in The Dance of Life, or S. Weir Mitchell, who wrote about mescaline. LSD for us never delivered visions. It delivered insight and feelings and complex thoughts, but not visions, not activity in the visual cortex that these classical commentators had led us to expect. And I had been in India for a number of years and pretty well managed to convince myself that whatever spirituality had ever been there, it had evaporated thousands of years ago, and that what we were left with was a very grasping and mendacious priestly hierarchy that was about as cynical as religion gets. And I was raised Catholic, so I know what I'm talking about. And so then we decided, well, where the gnosis must be is in the Amazon, where we knew there was a pristine Aboriginal shamanism based on hallucinogens. And I stress our youth because I think people imagine that you can only make contributions if you're old and laden with degrees and that sort of thing. And basically our pure, reckless inventiveness carried us further into the heart of the mystery than I would ever have believed possible. And I should say a little bit about the method, because I think it's important. Rationalism in confrontation with the weird edges is what's always worked for me. In other words, if you're a true believer, if you have some prepackaged philosophy, then you're going to miss a great deal because you're pre-programmed to ignore what doesn't fit into your model. And it doesn't matter what your model is. But if you are simply the open-minded skeptic / witness, and then if you push at the edges of the phenomenal world, go to the highest mountains, the oldest cities, the deepest deserts, the most remote jungles, and just simply put yourself in these circumstances, the cosmic giggle can get at you. It can't get at you if you're pursuing your job, delivering messages for Matthew and Son, or whatever it is you've got going. But if you will tear the human atom of your individuality out of the collectivity and set yourself into a wilderness, a desert, an uninhabited island, then this thing can rise out of the depths and communicate if it chooses, shape your life, for sure, blow your mind.
In early February of 1971, I was passing through southern Colombia on my way with my brother and friends to an expedition into Colombian Amazonas. Our route led us through Florencia, the provincial capital of the departamento of Caquetá. There we paused a few days, awaiting an airplane to carry us to our embarkation point on the Rio Putumayo, a river whose vast expanse is the border between Colombia and her two southern neighbors, Ecuador and Peru. The day was especially hot, and we had left the oppressive confines of our hotel near the noisy central market and bus station. We walked southwest, out of town perhaps a mile. Here were the warm waters of the Rio Hacha, across rolling pastures of tall grass. After swimming in the river, playing in deep pools the warm torrent had carved in the black basaltic stream bed, we returned through the same meadows. One more familiar than I with the appearance of Stropharia cubensis pointed out a single large specimen standing tall and alone in an old bit of cow manure. Impulsively and at my companion's suggestion, I ate the whole mushroom. It all occupied but a moment, and then on we trudged, tired from our swim, a tropical thunderstorm moving toward us along the eastern edge of the Andean Cordillera where Florencia is located. For perhaps a quarter hour we walked on, mostly in silence. Wearily I hung my head, almost hypnotized by the sight of the regular motion of my boots cutting through the grass. To align my back, to throw off my lethargy, I paused and stretched, scanning the horizon. The feeling of the bigness of the sky that I have come to associate with psilocybin rushed down on me there for the first time. I asked my friends to pause and sat down heavily on the ground. A silent thunder seemed to shake the air before me. Things stood out with a new presence and significance. It came like a wave and passed like a wave as the first fury of the tropical storm burst over us, leaving us soaked. In the sodden retreat, the brief moment preceding our frantic withdrawal went unmentioned by me. I recognized my experience as being induced by the mushroom, but I was involved, I thought, in a deep jungle search for hallucinogens of a different sort, orally active DMT-containing drugs, and yahe and its admixture plants. I filed the mushroom experience as something to look into another time. Longtime residents of Colombia assured me that the mushroom occurred exclusively on the dung of Cebu cattle, and I assumed that in the jungle of the interior, where I was shortly to be, I could expect no cattle or pasture. I put the thought of mushrooms from my mind as I anticipated the rigors of the Rio Putumayo descent toward our target destination, a remote mission called La Chorrera.
We'll just start with a song that was inspired by some experiences that Terence speaks about. fly to distant galaxies without any rocket ship. We can ride the racing neural pathways of the brain. We can slither with the snakes in the swamps of the primeval jungle, yeah. We can jump to the geometries of the future light sound. Because inner and outer space are exactly the same, yeah. When you start hearing voices speaking inside of your brain, yeah, then you might start to feel just a bit like you're going insane, yeah, yeah. Inner and outer space are exactly the same. Now we can laugh to ourselves deep within the belly of the beast. We can raise our voices in heated discussion to no avail. We can see from the sides of our minds more truly than from the front. We can begin to sense an alien intelligence taking shape from the forward. I said inner and outer space are exactly the same, yeah. When you start hearing voices speaking inside of your brain, yeah, then you might start to feel just a bit like you're going insane, yeah, yeah. When inner and outer space are exactly the same. Fantastic conspiracies about all the evil in the world. We can theorize and conceptualize, till it no longer does us any good. We can cling to our thoughts till we just can't do it anymore, yeah, yeah. We can check all the excess baggage of our minds at the door. Because inner and outer space are exactly the same, yeah. When you start hearing voices speaking inside of your brain, yeah, then you might start to feel just a bit like you're going insane. And maybe you are, because inner and outer space are exactly the same.
At dawn, the appointed morning, all our animals, cameras, I Ching, butterfly nets, plant presses, formaldehyde, notebooks, Finnegan's Wake, all the things that one must have to go into the Amazon, were piled at the river's edge. On the tiny trading boat that was to be our vessel, Ermito, our captain, indicated that we were to have the area on top of the cases of bottled fluorescent soda. We were informed that it was 6 to 12 days to where we wanted to go, depending on business. Puerto Leguizamo disappeared, and the river, the green bank, the shrill of insects and parrots, the brown water became our world. Out on the river, the past could enter the stillness and exfoliate before the mind's eye like some dark rows of interlocking casuistry, forces visible and hidden, stretching back into one's past, migrations, religious conversions, discoveries make each a microcosm of the larger pattern of history on a scale of millennia. The inertion of introspection is toward memory, for only in memory is the past recaptured and understood. In the fact of experiencing and making the present, we are all actors, but in the lacuna, in the rare moments when experience in the present is a minimal thing, an indolent self-examining thing, then memory is free to speak and call forth the landscapes of our striving, in other moments now past. Now, the now that is a time beyond the confines of this story, a now in which this story is past, I do not worry the past as I did then. It is now set for me in a way that it was not set then. Not set then because so recent, still to be relived in memory and learned from. 5 days of river travel lay before us, undemanding, freeing the mind to rove and scan. Two all-inclusive categories emerged in the world that was our vessel and crew and ourselves out on a broad river whose distant banks were no more than a dark green line separating river and sky. Two categories, the familiar and the unfamiliar. The unfamiliar was everywhere, drawing inane analogies into common conversation. The Putumayo is like the Ganges. The jungle invokes Ambon. The sky is similar to the skies of the Serengeti Plain, etc. The illusion of understanding, a lame way of getting one's bearings. The unfamiliar does not give up its secrets in this game. The Putumayo does not become like the Ganges. The unfamiliar must become known as itself before it is correctly recognized. The familiar things are people. The people here appear as known quantities because they have been known in the past. So long as the future remains like the past, they will remain known quantities. Certainly this is not New York, Boulder, or Berkeley, but we are trying to become extra-environmentals, develop a sense of appropriate action that is never at a loss. It is the familiarity of these people that makes them windows in my imagination, opening onto the past.
Why had people like ourselves come to the steaming jungles of Amazonian Colombia? We were a party of 5, bound by friendship, extravagant imagination, naivete, and a dedication to travel and exotic experience. Eve, our translator, was the only member of the group not long an acquaintance of us all. She was an American like ourselves who had lived several years in South America and had traveled in the East, where I had passed her once in the Kathmandu airport. Another story. In Colombia, she was recently free of a long relationship and fell in with our group, having nothing better to do. She and I were lovers of some 2 weeks when we arrived at La Chorrera. The other 3 members of our party, beside myself, were my brother, the youngest and least traveled of us, a student of botany and a colleague of long standing; Vanessa, an old school friend of mine from the Experimental College in Berkeley, trained in anthropology and photography and traveling on her own; and Dave, another old friend of mine, a gay meditator, a maker of pottery, an embroiderer of blue jeans, and like Vanessa, a New Yorker. As for myself, just 4 months before this trip, my brother and I had endured the grief of the death of our mother. Previous to that, I had been traveling 3 years in India and Indonesia, had worked in Japan and then in Canada, where we had all held a reunion and planned this Amazon expedition to investigate the depths of the psychedelic experience. I deliberately do not wish to say much about any of us. Let me say, though, that we were miseducated, perhaps, but well-educated, certainly. Our differences arose out of the faith that each had in his own ability to understand the situation correctly. Often these descriptions did not agree, as is a common enough situation among strong personalities or witnesses to an unusual event. We were complex people, or we would not have been doing what we were doing. None of us were yet 24 years old. We had been drawn together through the political turmoil that had characterized years shared in Berkeley. We had sorted the ideological options and had decided to put all of our chips on the exploration of the potential of the psychedelic experience
as the shortest path to the sort of millennium that our radical politics had taught us to hope for.
When we went to La Chorrera, which is the epicenter of the Witoto tribe, it's their ancestral home, so that's where we had to go to get this ukuhe, this orally active varroa paste, or so we thought. So we went to La Chorrera in search of that. And when we got to La Chorrera, we'd been warned by a couple anthropologists we met along the way and so on that, you just can't march into this village and start asking about ukuhe. They're going to go completely nuts. And they'll probably kill you because it's a big secret, So he said, yeah, we know, but we're going anyway. But we'll be careful, So we got there, and when we got to La Chorrera, turns out La Chorrera is this mission village in the middle of the Amazon that had been cleared for cattle. And so, there were cattle all over the place, and the cow dung of the cebu cow is the preferred substrate for the Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms. So at this place, literally, there were huge clusters of mushrooms growing up out of every cow pie in the pasture, and we knew what they were. We had books and we knew what they were. You couldn't walk through the pasture without kicking these things over. So I thought, well, this is great. We were all happy hippies, and we thought, well, while we're looking for the real mystery, here's a nice distraction, that we can take and have fun and giggle and all that. And so we said, well, fantastic. And so we started nibbling on these things, and it finally got to a point where we were nibbling on them quite a lot. And because actually there wasn't that much to eat, what we had brought with us was canned, tins of meat and rice and things like that. And so, there wasn't a lot to eat, and we were actually, we put mushrooms in our soup and in our rice, and we were taking them all the time, really. And it led to a kind of a state of being, half loaded on psilocybin all the time. And we were smoking a lot of pot, and we were, a bunch of very sort of verbal people anyway. And so the conversations and the ideas just flowed, and got stranger and stranger and stranger. One of the things we'd noticed on the mushrooms, especially, and also on DMT, but on the mushrooms, was that at high doses, you could perceive a sound inside your head, like a buzzing or a sort of like wind chimes, or sort of, hard to put your finger on, but that if you listen very closely, you could sing, you could imitate it. And at a certain point, your imitation wasn't that close to what it actually sounded like, but at a certain point, they locked in to each other. And then this sound, which was kind of like a howling and kind of like a buzzing and kind of like a screaming and it kind of, like singing. It was all of these things. I could make it right here, but I'm not going to. Because I don't want to disrupt the fabric of space-time. But it was like that, and it would elicit, long intervals of hallucination, and it was just very satisfying that you could modulate sound in this way and get this extended effect. And so we came up with this idea that, well, maybe we can use sound as the force to catalyze what was essentially a chemical reaction, which we speculated that, if you hit the molecules of a mushroom with the right frequency that you could cause psilocybin to intercalate into the DNA of the mushroom simultaneously with the DNA of our own brains, and it would achieve a superconducting state, and it would generate a standing waveform, which would essentially be the standing wave, or a hologram, right? That's what a hologram is. It's a standing waveform that would reflect all of the information in DNA, in a form that you could look at and examine. That was our idea. And of course, it was a crazy idea and had no possibility of being, realized at all. But we had so talked ourselves into, we were so totally convinced that we were on the right track, and we were so ripped on psilocybin all the time, that we actually talked ourselves in. We conceived this experiment and utterly believed that it was going to work. And so strongly did we believe it was going to work that when all these strange things started to happen in the environment, we said, well, of course, this is a shock wave coming back from the future. And what this shows is that, 8 hours, 24 hours up ahead, we've succeeded. And the fact that things are getting weird proves that we've succeeded up in the future, And so we got ourselves into this cognitive sort of cul-de-sac where something had to happen. Well, so when we actually performed the experiment, we knew it was going to succeed. And when we made the sound and directed it at the mushroom and all that, what we postulated was going to happen didn't happen, of course. How could it? But something had to happen. And so what happened was that we went on this simultaneous trip. Now we're beyond drugs and into psychosis, basically, but where I became completely spread across the universe. That was my perception, that I had taken DMT, and I recollected this, that I recollected back to an occasion when I had smoked DMT and had the feeling that my ego, my consciousness had been completely spread across the entire space-time continuum. And so that's what I thought had happened. And Terence was having this simultaneous complementary psychosis where he became more or less totally focused on the environment and totally focused on me, because I think a lot of it was concern that, oh my God, you finally did it. You finally drove your little brother crazy. And it was true. And so then he was all, protective and all that. And he became very focused on me and on getting me back. In the meantime, I'm cruising, all of space-time, and slowly over days, about 2 weeks, every 24 hours, I went through a process of reintegration, where every 24 hours I became a little less literally spaced. It was, and because we were working inside this alchemical metaphor and the idea of the stages of this process, and because all of our companions there were although they were, probably as loose as we were, but they were out of the loop at this point. They were just appalled. They basically wanted to call in the airplanes and get us to a mental hospital and get the Thorazine as quickly as possible. But Terence and I, we understood each other. We knew what was going on. We could communicate. And Terence was holding them off and saying, no, just let this process go. And I'm very grateful to him that he did, because I think that's exactly what needed to happen. It was an integration process, which if it had been interrupted, I probably never would have recovered. But because we let it go its natural course, I came back together, more or less, utterly transformed. Not necessarily in a better way, but at least, I can put my shoes on and tie them and stuff like that. And
Chapter 11. The Experiment at La Chorrera. The night was absolutely black. A low-lying cloud bank had appeared, muffling the small world of La Chorrera and wrapping it in a bowl of all-absorbing velvet darkness. Following the storm, we had rebuilt our fire and had driven off several liters of water from our infusion of Banisteriopsis caapi. While I completed the boiling, Ev and Dennis went to their hammocks and lay down to await the completion of the preparations. We laughed together and talked softly. Yet in spite of this, there was an undercurrent of tension as we approached the experiment into which so much of our energy had been poured. It was very critical. They were becoming very clumsy and seemed to find their bodies hard to handle. It was that which had sent them to their hammocks. I said that I would do whatever needed attention. Our little hut on its stilts looked in the flickering firelight like a small spaceship dropped into the howling jungles of an alien world. We all felt like we were approaching hyperspatial overdrive. There was a sense of immense energies accumulating. The effect was reinforced by the hammocks hanging like acceleration slings ready to receive a starship's crew. Dennis lay in his hammock, nearly unable to hold a pencil, but writing furiously in tight operational terms about the experiment just ahead. Dennis explained that he was unable to move very well because something having to do with the backward flow of time and the ever-increasing constraints on the set of possible futures had rendered him nearly immobile. Only the mind, planning and computing, was free. I finished boiling the yahe. I ground the admixture plants and added them to the cooling brew. I moved the yahe into the hut, then the mushroom. Those things in place, we were ready to begin. Prior to this point, we had taken no hallucinogens for several days. The effects we were experiencing were not arising from that source. Something else was happening. Dennis was now narrating our countdown toward an omega point that none of us could really understand. We were completely transformed with the expectation that possibly we would witness the outbreak of the millennium. It was Dennis who finally spoke. A series of quantized energy levels have to be broken through in order to bond this thing. It is part mythology, part psychology, part applied physics, who knows? We will make 3 attempts before we break out of the experimental mode. We all drank the yahe, sending it churning through our guts. Dennis took only 1 mushroom so that he could hear the tone. Darkness was utter, and we had no clocks. All was finally in readiness. The living mushroom, the harmine brew, the harmine smoking mixture. After we each had taken a half a cup of the yahe infusion, we settled down to wait. Dennis had been hearing the ESR tone that he deemed the sine qua non of what we were attempting for the past several days. After about 15 minutes, he announced that he could hear it more clearly and that it was gaining strength. He felt prepared to attempt the experiment at any time, he said. The candle went out and he sounded his first howl of hypercarbylation. It was mechanical and loud like a bull roarer and ended with a convulsive spasm that traveled throughout his body and landed him out of his hammock on the floor. We relit the candle only long enough to determine that everyone wanted to continue. Again, a long, whirring yodel, strange and unexpectedly mechanical each time it was sounded. I suggested a break before the third attempt, but Dennis was quite agitated and eager to bring it through, as he put it. We settled in for the third yell, and when it came, it was like the others, but lasted much longer and became much louder. It was like an electric siren wailing atomic attack over the still night jungle.
One must take enough psilocybin to allow the sound to be audible. This sound we understand to be the ESR of the resonating psilocybin alkaloids within the mushroom. The presence of rapidly metabolizing high-energy tryptamines within the yahe acts as antenna that sensitizes the neural matrix to the spin resonance energy of the Stropharia psilocybin. It is this principle that allows the signal to be made audible. It must then be amplified via the tryptamine admixture antenna to what is felt to be its fullest amplitude, then by a local signal.
And when it finally died away, that too was like the dying away of a siren. Then, there in the absolute darkness of our Amazon hut was silence, the silence of the transition from one world to another, the silence of the Gidneago Gap.
Terence described it to me he said, Dennis is totally broken through when he made the sound. And I said, I don't exactly understand what you want. This. And he says, well, a lot of people don't see it, and it's best that they don't. But there's insect-like anthropologists studying this. And at the time of making the sound, or hearing the sound, this seen or unseen guardian will, I think he said, operate on your mouth. So you can make the sound. Now, Dennis.
I know
Here's how it happened to Dennis.
There are insect anthropologists studying the human race?
Yes, and it's about, I think he said 12 to 15 feet tall. Well, anyway, what happened to Dennis was, he was just out there taking a piss, but of course it was after at least a week of mushrooms. And he was taking a piss, and a light came out of the ground, and it just began to rumble up from inside him, and he blared out the sound. And after that, Dennis was changed. It was just like Terence. Before, when he came down, he was in his they're both very tall and skinny. Maybe Dennis is taller, and he just looked down at me, with this bluish haze around his face, and his eyes were so wide open, like this, looking right into me, saying, Michael, I know you'll make the sound, but will Sarah make the sound?
people who have never taken hallucinogenic drugs but have some mild interest in it, or just in the course of generally educating yourself about reality, I think people who have never taken psychedelics think that it's sort of like dreaming while you're awake, or geometric patterns, colors. They always say, the colors, malarkey, the colors, forget the colors. It is not like that. Psychedelic experiences at effective doses, not piddling doses, effective doses, are visionary scenarios. They are three-dimensional unfoldments of information that is extraordinarily complex, architectonically connected, and ordered. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what is unique to psilocybin. What is unique to psilocybin is that overlaid over what I just described is, big surprise, a voice. A voice. Everybody knows this who has to do with this stuff. Gordon Wasson, Richard Schultes, Albert Hoffman. The giants know that this stuff is animate. This is not a drug. It's something which is disguising itself as a drug in order not to spread alarm. There is a voice which speaks to you in the language of your homeland, whether that be Mazatecan or English, and the voice surprises you. In other words, you cannot anticipate it. Now, of course, at this point, though I don't imagine many of them have forced their way in here, the psychological school will come forward and say, well, it's a voice typical of mental aberration, symptom 1 of schizophrenia, a voice. Yes, we are not naive. We went to the same schools you did, thank you. If we are in fact being penetrated by a non-human intelligence that presumably somehow, perhaps not physically, but perhaps physically, can cross from star to star, then we are dealing with something vastly more sophisticated than ourselves. That's just given at the get-go. Well, if it's vastly more advanced than we are, then DNA sequencing, complete understanding of the molecular genesis of thought, so forth and so on, would be no problem for that level of technical sophistication. You would also like to think that ethics and good taste would keep pace with this evolutionary process. So to my mind, the idea of fleets of alien spacecraft filling the skies of Earth, that's as unsubtle as kicking down somebody's front door with an M1 tank to announce, we're here. I don't think you would do it that way. If you really wanted to study a aboriginal race and you really had a hot technology, what you would do is you would study their social psychology and you would say, are there any chinks in the armor of their expectations about how reality behaves? And you would discover, in studying us, this species intoxicates itself, and it has a curious attitude towards its intoxications. Anything goes. So if somebody drinks a pint of Stolichnaya and announces that they see pink elephants, we are all amused. We say, of course you do, you were drunk out of your mind. Isn't it obvious that an alien would hide its presence in an intoxication? That this is the non-invasive, tasteful, respectful way to have intercourse with another species. I was very interested in coming to this thing and studying the psychology of the group, and it was very fascinating to me that both of the speakers, where I listened to the whole thing, were very concerned to refute the psychological explanation, which I gather is the Antichrist around here. And as I understand it, somebody said to me, the first thing they said to me, I thought, my God, these people are on end. He said, I want you to know that this Jungian thing is bullshit. I said, okay, that's fine. However, this is like beating a dead horse. Has the news from quantum physics not reached the UFO community? Is it not now thoroughly assimilated that an observer is necessary for reality to exist at all? It's all psychological. There's no distinction. And so these people who have such enthusiasm for beryllium ships from Arcturus or wherever should be informed, same. So now what is physics telling us? Saying, folks, hold your horses here. It turns out the cheerful world of billiard ball-like atoms winging their way through Newtonian space is in for serious revision. It turns out that these particles aren't even particles. They're waves. Well, no, not exactly. They're both. Well, what I actually meant to say was, and you discover the babble of mad people is what is coming out of the physics departments today. Science has collapsed. Its core has given way to contradiction. Carried far enough, the analysis of this stage will show you that it has no, quote, reality to it. Now this plays nicely right into my hands. Let's go back now to those drug-induced hallucinations. I think every UFO investigator in the country, they have these forms when they come rushing out to your house when you report an 11-mile-long green cigars overhead. And the first question is, are you intoxicated? Do you have a history of taking drugs? What is your relationship to altered states? Most encounters with extraterrestrials take place in altered states. That's what altered states are. Reality is, the tip of an iceberg of irrationality that we've managed to drag ourselves up onto for a few panting moments before we slip back into the sea of the unreal. Dave and Vanessa followed me back to the forest, grumbling a good part of the way. When we had gone slightly past the place where I had parted from Dennis, we came upon something which could not at first be fitted into any set of expectations. This was Dennis' ruana and shirt discarded in the middle of the path. Next came a pair of pants, and then further on 2 sweat socks. And, though I was to learn this only later, his glasses and his boots had also been hurled away. Following this trail of cast-off garments led us back to the hut in the forest. There we found Ev and Dennis, both naked and sitting on the floor of the hut, discussing and doing the Ask Dennis meditation. With the comment that you cannot receive a proper initiation unless you are naked, Dennis insisted that we take off our clothes. Vanessa peeled, and Dave and I followed her example. The presence of the mushroom was there, and it seemed to be saying, "Take off your clothes. Throw everything away. Everything is breaking. All objects are no good to you now. Throw everything away. You do not need it anymore." We all looked at each other, glossy pubic hair and secret genitals now in the sunshine. I rolled a joint then. We sat in a circle and smoked. We told Dave and Vanessa about the teaching and urged them to try it with varying degrees of success, since a voice in the head is a very subjective thing. If one has it, there is no doubt. If one does not have it, it seems a very murky thing. Everything was very amicable, except that Dennis was showing a tendency to talk right through other people's comments, as if they were not present. It was as though he were on a different time track from the rest of us, since he really seemed unable to realize that someone else was talking. We thought that it was logical to untie our hammocks from the house and take nothing but our hammocks and go naked into the jungle, tie the hammocks in a tree, and then get into these hammocks. We would then explore the mode, because clearly you could do more than ask or answer questions. The door was standing open. God alone knew what one could do. I asked the thing in my mind what should be done and had received instruction that we should visually meditate on our lives and, starting from the present, trace back through our entire life, encountering and setting things right with every sentient creature that we had ever wronged. When we reached the end of this process, we would leave our bodies and be somehow free in the dimension of absolute freedom that seemed so near. Lying in our hammocks, we set out to meditate our way to hyperspace. I could see myself at La Chorrera, then going down the trail to El Encanto, up the river to Leguizamo and back to Bogota, back to Canada, and at each point I would meet the people that I had lived my life with, and I would say, "We got it. I'm sorry, I hope I didn't offend you too much back there in 3D. It's all over now, it's all over." I could see people. Immediately I reached out for all of them. I seemed to be able to reach them. "We're in the Amazon," I explained to each, "and now we're going home, or someplace." The vision had an utterly bizarre quality. Tears welled up behind my closed eyelids. It was very peculiar. The voice of the teacher spoke in my head. "You've found it. This is it. It's all over now. There is no more. Within a few hours, the superstructure of human civilization is going to collapse, and your species is going to go to Jupiter and then to the stars. A day of high adventure dawns for man at last."
During this sleepless period, I sat one night on this laundry rock below the police house where Dennis was incarcerated, and he was more or less incarcerated because he refused to keep his clothes on, and anything put in a room with him he would hurl out the window. He even hurled the window frame out the window. So he was thorough. I said nothing to anyone, but I formed the resolve not to spend that sleepless night as I had spent the others, wandering the fields like the fox spirit or meditating at the Chorro. Rather, I would sit here where the lake emptied and the Agarra Paraná resumed its languid course, here at the boat landing, 70 feet down a steep mud bank from the river house. I would sit through the night and watch. And so, all night long, I sat reviewing the things that had passed, seeming to divide my consciousness and send it both backward through my family tree and forward into the future. I seemed to see all the years ahead. I saw some technique emerging from this contact, which I now think is the technique for growing Stropharia cubensis. Our careers pursued across space and time, and finally vindication as the world realized the truth of the transdimensional nature of the Stropharia visions and the true nearness of the worlds that they had thrown open. For it had become my belief that the contact with an intelligent and utterly alien species was beginning for humanity. It seemed that out of the long night of cosmic time, the novelty of novelties, the moment of contact between minds on utterly different planes was beginning. We were among the first to achieve contact with this other species. It was the real thing. We had come to the equatorial jungle to explore the dimensions glimpsed in tryptamine ecstasy, and there in the darkness of the heart of the Amazon, we had been found and touched by this bizarre and ancient life form that was now awakening to the global potential of a symbiotic relationship with technical humanity. All night long, strange vistas and insights poured through me. I saw gigantic machineries and worlds of vegetable and mechanical forms on scales inconceivably vast. Time, agatized and glittering, seemed to pour by me like living superfluids inhabiting dream regions of terrible pressure and super cold. And I saw the plan, the mighty plan, at last. It was an ecstasy, an ecstasis that lasted hours and placed the seal of completion on all of my previous life. At the end, I felt reborn, but as what, I knew not.
The mushroom is a transdimensional doorway which sly fairies have left slightly ajar for anyone to enter into who can find the key and who wishes to use this power, the power of vision, to explore this peculiar and naturally occurring psychoactive complex. We are closing distance with the most profound event a planetary ecology can encounter, the emergence of life from the dark chrysalis of matter.
I have always had a relationship to nature which I pretty much took for granted, but perhaps it was more intense and somewhat unique than most people's. I grew up in a small town in Colorado. I was very early into being a rock hound and then a butterfly collector. I had no interest in stamps or baseball cards or anything like that. It was always natural objects. And the attraction of tropical butterflies was the exuberant expanse of color, the affirmation of the patterned richness of the universe that seemed to be thrown out like a spark by these things. And eventually I pursued it quite far and was for some time a professional butterfly collector in tropical Indonesia in a pre-Buddhist incarnation. And this search for iridescence thrown off by nature, seen first in the glint of metallic ore crystals, and then in the colorful expanse of butterflies, and then in tropical fish, reached a kind of apotheosis with the discovery of the psychedelic plant hallucinogens, where suddenly the color, the flash, the iridescence was not 2 or 3 dimensional, but it was multidimensional. It was inside one, outside one. It was like the ultimate tropical aquarium, the ultimate butterfly cabinet, the ultimate mineral show.
Again, I was very lucky. I read Carl Jung very early, before the Jungians really got a hold of him and ruined it. And what Jung is saying about conceiving your life as a quest is absolutely true. Psyche is some kind of semi-malleable medium. And if you set yourself up as a loser, if you image yourself as a loser, you will be a loser, and so forth. This is not big news. But what's big news is that if you set your life up as a quest, you will actually find something transcendental and unimaginable. I mean, I am living proof of this because I set my life up as a quest for a perverse reason, to prove that there was no mystery. In other words, to debunk it, to say, I will follow the ancient formulae and show that it's baloney by doing it perfectly and achieving nothing. That's the kind of guy I am. However,
I mean, I've met people
who say, you know, I'm psychedelic, I know exactly what you're talking about, blah blah. You say, oh well, what's your drug history? And you say, well, I took MDMA twice. You say, look, you know, just because you've had a glass of cold water doesn't mean you are now ready to be food editor for the La Rus Gastronomique, my friend. I mean, there's more to it than that, believe me.
Mushrooms are my thing. I mean, that they enlightened me, they straightened me out, they love me. But the way to do mushrooms is the very first move, if you're interested in mushrooms, is, for God's sake, buy a scale. Buy a scale. I mean, you wouldn't think that this would be considered such an exotic suggestion to people who are going to put their bodies and minds on the line, because people don't take enough. People do not take enough mushrooms. They take pissant amounts and then they claim that they're initiates. You must take a measured 5 dried grams on an empty stomach. Measured. And when you see what that is, you'll realize that, you know, you weren't even camped in the atrium, you were camped in the driveway. Mushrooms, in some ways, I mean, DMT is the most terrifying and astonishing thing in the universe, but it's very hard to know what to do with it. Psilocybin is your friend. It wants to teach. It will take you by the hand and forgive you and lead you and be with you. And it speaks. This is the amazing thing. And you're hearing this from, you know, somebody who graduated from Heidegger and F.H. Bradley. It speaks. No other psychedelic does that, in my experience. Occasionally, a phrase will pop into your head on another substance that is like a gift, an aphorism. But I mean, psilocybin raves. It raves. And it has positions. I mean, you may not like psilocybin as a person, because it is not... the astonishing thing about the psilocybin entity, to my mind, and I get good confirmation of this, is it is not very earthly. I mean, it wants to show you machines the size of Manhattan in orbit around alien stars. It wants to talk about the sweep through of the da-da-da-da, which happened before the Earth cooled, and it, you know, has seen the empires of the Rull out at the rim and all the rest of it. And it's very puzzling, this cosmic galactarian tone, because then you switch over to ayahuasca, which is literally just a twist of the molecule, just the tiniest tweaking of the molecule, and suddenly it's about childbirth, rivers, the land, the feminine, looking inside your body, curing diseases, feeling, telepathy, communication. It could hardly be more different, and yet chemically these things are like two sides of the same coin. Yes, first come the dancing mice, the little candies, the colored grids, and so forth and so on. But what eventually happens, quickly, like 10 minutes later, is there is an entity in the trance, in the vision. There is a mind there waiting that speaks good English and invites you up into its room. And what it is it's a voice in the head that people strove to attain for 1,000 years. This was the sine qua non of intellectual accomplishment in the Greco-Roman world, and the Logos told you the right way to live. And this is sort of what you get with psilocybin. You get a voice that can confound you with the depth and brilliance of its answers. This is what you want. And I've had over and over the experience of showing somebody what 5 grams is, and they're appalled. They say, my God, you can't be serious. I mean, I take a fifth that much, a fourth that much. Yeah, well, that's the problem. That's why you don't have elves in the attic and bats in the belfry like I do. A lot of people have said you're a hallucination nut. You're obsessed with hallucination. I freely admit it. But I will defend my obsession with vision. I think the world wants to be seen. I think Blake was right that the divine imagination is something beheld. And for me, the visions are the proof that this is not my mind. And the visions are the proof that this is not simply chemical chaos in the nervous system. And when we communicate with each other and understand each other, we instinctively reach for visual metaphors. I see what you mean. Look here, fella. She painted a picture. His words were so beautiful. It means that we really associate meaning with seeing something. By this time the fog was impenetrable, and we all retired for the night, but not before Eve related that in the silence before the appearance of the fog, she had had a hallucination with her eyes closed of a strange elf-like creature rolling a complicated polyhedron along the ground. Each facet of this polyhedron seemed, she said, like a window onto another place in time, or another world. It's the stone, I breathed. The lapis philosophorum, glimpsed in the Amazonian night, seemingly a great multidimensional jewel in the keeping of a telluric dwarf. The power of the image was deep and touching. I seemed to feel the hopes of the old alchemists, the puffers great and small, who had sought the lapis in the cloudy swirling of their alembics. I had never seen or imagined the mystery of the stone thus, but in listening to Eve's description of what she had seen, an image formed in my mind that to this day remains with me. It is the image of the stone as hyperdimensional jewel become UFO, the human soul becomes starship. It is the universal panacea at the end of time. All history, the shockwave of this final unveiling of the potential of the human psyche. These thoughts, these reveries seemed then like the stirring of something vast, something dimly sensed, stretched out over millions of years, something about the destiny of mankind and the return of the soul to its awesome and hidden source. What was happening to us? Through it all, we were still after the lens-shaped object. What the teacher told me in the first few days after the experiment was, you almost got it, you didn't quite get it, or rather it used the metaphor of condensation. It is condensing. It was like a perfect alchemical metaphor. The stone is everywhere. It is here. Dennis would say, I can see it. It's 250 feet away, to the left, down near the water hole, hovering above the water. The world seemed filled with a near-bending wonder and power that assured me that all things were possible, and that the course of things in the light of this were moving in the right direction. Be amazed at nothing. You are to receive the kingship of the Father. What complicated this was I, who had been cast in the role of the skeptic and the witness, had noticed that the moment he had forged the joint, as he called it, something began to happen for me, something very unusual. What it was the teaching voice familiar from psilocybin experiences, but with none of the ambiguity and difficulty of connection that I had associated with the psilocybin experiences. Instead, it just came on and appeared to be locked in place. There was nothing but this voice, and it was talking at such a speed that I would walk these jungle trails like this. Yes, yes. And it was just, at that speed, not for minutes, but for months, And what it was concerned to convey is what I now call the time wave. I was not an I Ching scholar, I was not a sinologist, I certainly was not a mathematician, but this inner prompting would give me no peace until I proceeded along this line to its conclusion. Well, I, of course, the bewildered recipient of this information, was trying to figure out, to get ahead of the game and say, where is this headed? What is this thing trying to show me? And I decided it must be that what's happening here is I'm discovering an ancient Chinese calendar. Because, there are 64 hexagrams and 6 lines in each hexagram. That gives a grand total of 384 lines, or yao. That's an interesting number. A lunation, a lunar cycle, is 29 point something days. Anyway, 13 of them are 383.89 days. It's within a decimal fraction of 384. And I thought, I'm sort of like the guy who decoded Stonehenge or something. This is an agricultural calendar of 13 lunar cycles, and from ancient China, apparently. And of course, the obvious objection from people was, but what a lousy calendar. It slips 19 days per year against the sun. It's 19 days more than a solar year. But I think that there may have been a reason for that. You see, we in the West are static freaks, stability freaks. So we have a calendar that does not move against the fixed stars. The equinoctial and solstitial points only move with the precession of the equinoxes, which is this very large cycle that you can't do anything about. But in an ordinary human life, it's hardly noticeable. It only moves one zodiacal sign every 2,000 years. So that tells you how slowly it moves. We are stability freaks. But if you had a calendar that precessed 19 days against the solar year, a lunar calendar, then you would have a calendar whose entire message was change, flux, flow. You would be born, if you were born at Christmas time and Christmas fell in winter at your birth, before you saw death at age 60, you would have celebrated Christmas in the springtime, at high summer, in early fall, in late fall. The entire sliding and slipping of the cosmic machinery would teach you a lesson the Western mind doesn't want to learn, which is, as Heraclitus said, pantit rea, all flows, nothing lasts. So I played with that for a while, and it was interesting, but I was not given peace by my muse, who said, no, this is, Terence, this is stupid stuff. You know that poem by A.E. Housman? Anyway, there was more to it. And so finally I realized, or I was told, treat your wave as though it were the lowest unit in a modular hierarchy that is structured the way the I Ching is structured. Okay, so that sounds arcane, but I'll explain what it means. It's fairly straightforward. It means take the wave with the 384 yao, the 64 hexagrams running in two directions. And by the way, there are old sayings in the I Ching which say stuff like the forward-running numbers refer to the past, the backward-running numbers refer to the future. Well, in the I Ching as we have it today, there are neither forward nor backward-running numbers. There are just numbers. So I had the confidence, I'm like a noetic archaeologist with nut pick and toothbrush. I am reconstructing a crushed intellectual object, which if I can get it all cleaned off and going again, it's the original cuckoo clock or Ferrari or whatever it was. Bear with me, we're almost over the top here. I took the little wave and I put 6 of them in a row to represent 6 lines. And then I took the wave and I magnified it by a power of 3, so that it was 3 times bigger than it had been. And I laid 2 of those over my 6 to represent the 2 trigrams that are components of each hexagram. And then I took my original wave and I magnified it by a power of 6. And I laid it over the 6 little ones, over the 2 middle-sized ones. I laid 1 big one representing a hexagram in its unitary totality. Well, and I felt a great sense of satisfaction when this was all done, and these had all been generated from the same point. And now what I had at this point was an 8.5-foot long piece of paper, graph paper, covered with colored pen strokes and tiny crab-like numbers, which I kept rolled in a bamboo tube, and I would corner people in dime stores and bus stations, and I would say, you know what this is? This is a map of history. This is a picture of time. This is how things happen. Well, it triggered a lot of alarm in my immediate circle, and my friends were having the what should be done meetings, you know, which it's always a bad sign when your friends hold meetings to decide what should be done. And finally, Ralph Abraham, who's a great friend and mathematician, he said to me, you know, what you have is an occult object. Nobody understands this thing but you. And it may make sense and it may not make sense, but the point is, no one can tell. And what you have to do if you want to be taken seriously is you have to take this structure and you have to turn it into an ordinary mathematical object so that fellow mathematicians can participate in this dialogue with you. Well, essentially, it was like telling a Hottentot to fly supersonically or something. I had no clue. I am not a mathematician. I had no clue. And I was sort of hoping Ralph would do it for me, you know, that I could con some smart guy into doing it for me.
For me, Terence is a special person because of the breadth of his knowledge and the evidence of a phenomenal integrity within it. So, first of all, when we first met, Terence was persistent in asking me about mathematics, kind of mathematics that I was interested in at that time, that nobody else had even heard about. And as our relationship developed, I saw that he had this philosophy of time, let's say, or maybe even mathematical model for the structure of time. That is an odd thing for a person to be obsessed with. And from this obsession, he had to learn a great deal about history. So in our process of trialoguing, we find it very much enriched by Terence's phenomenal knowledge of history, and not only that, but his special way of saying it. This sort of, you're familiar with this here, a bardic skill so that whatever he says will have more effect than it actually deserves.
It's almost as though Western science was fascinated by energy. For 5,000 years we pursued understanding energy, and this process ends with thermonuclear explosions in the deserts of the American Southwest. We can light the fire that burns in the heart of the distant stars. We know how to do that. That's what the Western mind achieved, political issues aside. The Eastern mind was not interested in energy. It was interested in time. And they spent 5,000 years deconstructing it, looking at it, and you don't use atom smashers. You don't use enormous physical pressure. It's a different problem, and you bring different tools to bear. You meditate. You look inside yourself. You study the movement of water around pebbles. You consider the situation. You study history. So the general conclusion from these screens is that novelty is being increased and conserved as we move through time. Now, for instance, in this screen, which is further closure with today, we see 562 million years, virtually the entire career of higher life forms on the planet. 8,500 years on the screen. The great Proto-Egyptian civilizations, Sumer, Ur, Chaldea, are strung out like pearls along this plunge. Egypt culminates that ancient hierarchical form of dominator society. Mycenaean pirates plunder Minoan Crete. At this point, here we have the Periclean age in Athens. Here we have the Augustinian age in Rome. Down here we have the Roman collapse, and then the oscillating around a mean in a high novelty domain that has characterized time since the fall of the Roman Empire. The Dark Ages is here. The 10th century Islam is here. The Black Death, the discovery of America, the European Enlightenment, World War II. Adolf Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. The atom bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. The summer of love is up here. Then the Reagan era stretches down through here, and the moment that we're currently living through is right down in here. Right there. Here we are. Right there, right there. This is this bump we were looking at. Then there's a descent into novelty that reaches maximum on the 8th of July. And then there's this very steep and prolonged period of habituation. Now, if we look at the past, you can see how these numbers have now changed. Now, today is seen to be roughly in resonance with 745 AD. The French Revolution is down here, going here. This is the Franco-Prussian War, the American Civil War. The 20th century begins right there. And Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany right there. The moon landing is right there. And then everything we've been living through has followed on since then. It means that, any moment is a kind of interference pattern created by the moments in the past, many moments in the past. I mean, like this shows you, I think. This is
so it's like synchronicities, in a sense.
Except that it explains them a different way. Yeah. It replaces all that mumbo-jumbo about mystery. Synchronicity by saying, this is just the inner penetration of
So on the
past.
way here, we passed a restaurant called Maya Palinka.
Yes, you passed it at a moment on the short scales when you were probably going through the classic Mayan bump. And if one is sensitive to this, a weird kind of psychedelic associationism begins to spread through reality, and it's no longer seen to be just the product of its own past casuistry, but that it has relationships to the past and the future that are not linear at all, but that are linked through this strange algorithm.
The reason I'm into all this is because I'm into what's weird. I always have been. I mean, I've always loved the bizarre, the outre, the stuff of the edge. And, you know, when I got to psychedelics, I thought I'd hit the main vein of sprung verse or something. I mean, if that's what you like, then this is your answer. You see, what the psychedelic is going to do is it's going to destroy your whole world, your whole conception of your world. And some people, that's tremendously liberating. They say, wonderful, at last I'm free of it. Other people say, my God, now I'm hopelessly mad. I have nothing left to cling to. I've really done it this time. And so that's almost an aesthetic judgment. Whether you like watching your world shredded before your eyes and made into nonsense, if that makes you feel liberated and secure, then you can sign up for this carnival. If that alarms you, I think best to stick to the tried and true. It's not for people of weak psychic constitution. And what shamanism is about is, I mean, I know someone who says of the mushrooms, my goal with taking mushrooms is always to be able to stand more. And they don't mean higher doses, they mean more of what it reveals. And I feel like that. I mean, the mushroom speaks. I didn't really stress this in my talk, but the strange, the confounding fact about these mushrooms is that they speak to you in plain English. And this is completely unexpected. How can such a thing be? I mean, one is dumbfounded in the presence of this. And yet, by being able to have an I-thou relationship to this thing, you open up yourself to what is essentially a magical dimension, a dimension of allyship with this thing. I come to this completely as a rationalist. I mean, I am more scientist, more rationalist than anything else. I am very uncomfortable with my position in the New Age. I hate all that stuff. The quartz crystal suppositories and the channeling of dead Egyptians and all this horrible stuff which goes on. I mean, it's just an affront to the thinking mind. But when I encountered these psychedelics, I said, my God, skepticism is the proper path. And I believe this. It's not to believe, it's to test. I said to the mushroom once, why us? Meaning my brother and me. Why us? And it said, because you don't believe in anything. You know, you're not a believer. And so it's a real thing. It's a real mystery. It will not yield to reason. It's a tremendously well-kept secret. I always like, my favorite story in the gospel is the story of Thomas the Doubter. Because remember, he wasn't present when Christ came to the upper room the first time after the crucifixion. And so then Thomas came a couple of days later, and the apostles said to him, they said, the Master was here. He was here. And he said, you guys have been smoking too much of these little brown cigarettes from Lebanon. We saw him crucified. He wasn't here. Well, so then Christ came a second time, and Thomas was present. And he said, unless I put my hand into the wound
I will not believe it. And so then Christ came the second time, and he said to Thomas, he said, Thomas, come forward. He said, put your hand into the wound. And then he did. And my interpretation of that gospel story is that alone of all the apostles, it was Thomas the doubter who touched the resurrection body, because he was the only one who had his shit together enough to doubt. And so if you doubt, they will actually let you put your hand into the wound. If you don't doubt, they will give you any kind of crap and send you happily along your way. So the best attitude towards these things, and it gets rid of the phonies, you know, the Telocs of this world, but it doesn't get rid of the real stuff, because the real stuff is real.
The truth does not require your belief. The truth is real. You can beat it on the ground, you can rip it apart, you can look inside it. Nobody needs to guard the truth from inspection. Nobody needs to tell you that, you know, you can't look behind the stage. And so my motivation is to try to, number one, bring people to the realization that the spiritual path, if you want to think of it that way, that is a real thing, and it will carry you to the real thing. All spiritual disciplines that I know, except for psychedelics, put a great deal of emphasis on putting the pedal to the metal. Push, 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 you know, meditate, make offerings, do mantrayana, do pranayama, do puja, push, push, push. With psychedelics, suddenly there's a very deep interest in, and where are the brakes? You see? You're no longer pushing. Once you get to the psychedelics, seeking is an attitude which ill becomes you. You have found it. You have found it. Now, what in the hell are you going to do with it? And this is a great dilemma for anyone who goes into this. I mean, I am, as I see myself, I'm a preacher in the marketplace. But I know, and I'm sure most of you know, that I could walk out of here, you could walk out of here, and you could go as far as your courage would carry you. There is no barrier. There are no more barriers. You can go as far as your fucking courage will carry you. And at that point, you have to ask the question, you know, do I want to be the mad monk of Cold Mountain? Do I want the villagers down in the valley to say, oh yes, we see him occasionally up in the mist, naked, flying with the eagles, because you can be that person. You know, you don't have to go back to your job as ad exec, stockbroker, or whatever it is. And so we stand on the edge of being able to leave history. This is what I stand for. I stand for the plants. The plants have souls. They carry the morphogenetic field of thousands of years. When you take psilocybin, it takes you. You are participating in all the trips that it ever induced in anyone. And this is a tremendously stable field of experiences. When you take a drug fresh out of the laboratory, it has no soul, it has no story, it has no direction. It's a product of the demon artifice of man. And I prefer to put my hand in the large hand of the goddess and make my way into this dimension under the aegis of the sanctioned vegetables that for millennia have always been there to fling open the doorways to vistas of pleasure and delight that would make you turn up your nose at the best Beverly Hills has to offer. Believe me, the inner riches are incomparable. And this is how we recover our dignity, by not being whores to mammon and pursuing all of this trash that they're peddling to us, and insist instead on the maximizing of human values, human emotion, and human community.
All technology really means, in the McLuhan sense, is the extensions of man. The extensions of man. And so language is a technology, shamanism is a technology, psilocybin is a technology, and certainly the internet is a technology. It's slowly, I think, dawning on a number of people that if we're talking about hallucinogens as consciousness-expanding drugs, then the only difference between a drug and a computer is that one is slightly too large to swallow. And our best people are working on that problem, even as we speak. The drugs of the future will be much more like computers. The computers of the future will be much more like drugs.
Well, I think of it, it's a way of writing, and I see three main elements. The first is to write about immediate perceptions in a fantastic way, to think of the things that are happening as being science fiction adventure, perhaps, unbelievably strange, but yet they're the real things that happen to you. Another point in transrealism is that you tend not to know how the work is going to end, such as one of my novels or this film. It's not clear how it's developing. The form is emerging organically. And if you could predict it, it wouldn't be truly alive. A third feature is to use immediate situations and immediate characters, because those are the most unpredictable. Example, we didn't know it before we came here, but Lisbon, or LH94, is a resonance of San Francisco. It's a city with a suspension bridge in front of a bay. So transreally, we're here in the pudding.
So it's like admitting the weirdness of ordinary existence, it sounds like.
If the writer can predict the end of the book, so can the reader. The book can't be interesting.
Is it simply a theory of writing? Why couldn't a person live this way?
You can surely live in a transreal way.
Is that schizophrenia?
It could be. But there can be fun madness, where you're permuting the world.
Once upon a line, I met a lonely girl to whom I took a fancy. Thank you for the present tense, she said. I do believe I share your sympathies. Oh, the ocean blue, so lovely. Oh, the windows blow so free. Birds are on the water, fish are in the air, they fly for
In a movie, I made a speech about
once
chaos.
upon a time I met a pretty girl to whom I took a fantasy.
Here's Terence getting his makeup put on.
It's not to get beautiful, huh?
Hi, Terence.
Otherwise they think I'm a very bad.
This is right. Okay, here's my makeup. Okay, here's Terence, McKenna. Terence, explain what it is that we're looking at here.
This is the monument to the departure point of the great Portuguese navigators who explored Africa and girdled the world in the 14th century.
Because they had the superior technology of the astrolabe. That was what gave them the edge up.
Cool. So Robert, Anton Wilson. Robert, you want to make a statement? Bob, hi.
Hi.
Say hi to Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Well, the age of navigation. We're going to navigate out into the... Master of Chaos, me, and Terence is the shaman, spelled with an X, and the neuromancer. Terence here to Giotto or... Nice of those tiles, Terence. Sort of like a Greco Christ, you know?
Well, there was a young gaucho named Bruno who said about sex, there is one thing I do know. Women are fine and boys are divine, but the iguana is numero uno.
All right.
You know, these people are not pretentious. They have no axe to grind. But I didn't know what it was.
That's an astrolabe? What does an astrolabe do?
It allows you to calculate your position more accurately than any previous instrument. So they were navigators. That was the deal.
In old-fashioned Aristotelian days, you believed in reality. Mosquito flies include only one reality.
Here we are
In Lisbon.
Smoking a hash cigarette. They say. Maybe it's just hand-rolled tobacco, you never know.
No.
Getting ready for the afternoon shooting. This is the easiest job I ever had.
And talk for an hour, and then answer questions for an hour.
Yeah, I usually just give scientific lectures. Shooting outside today.
Hola. Good morning.
Kind of, this street is called what?
Rue Auguste.
Uh-huh.
It's a kind of street for the novelty.
Novelty?
Yeah.
I use this principle in the creation of science fiction.
But it sounds like it could be a philosophy of life as well.
That's an interesting point, Terence. You have a very active con man's mind. Transrealism as a philosophy of life. Yes, your life is the supreme work of art, which you're creating as you go along. Everyone is an artist. Their work is their life. Pay attention to your immediate perceptions, take them seriously, but interpret them in a fantastic way.
Well, as I experience life, it is fantastic. So really, this is a call to realism, to admit the presence of the cosmic giggle, to not suppress it in the name of some linear notion of plot or expectation of how reality should be. Somehow, part of the package of being a living, thinking being is that you get a universe inside of you. You know, you get a galaxy-sized object inside you that you can access. And there are the mountains, the rivers, the jungles, the dynastic families, the ruins, the planets, the works of art, the poetry, the sciences, the magics of millions upon millions upon millions of worlds. And this is apparently who we each are. We're a little bit of eternity sticking into three-dimensional space and for some reason occupying time in a monkey body. But when you turn your eyes then inward, you discover the birthright, the existential facts out of which this particular existence emerged. And it's a great secret and a great comfort, because it means, mystery didn't die with the fall of Arthur or the fall of Atlantis or the fall of anything. Mystery is alive in the moment, in the here and now. It just simply lies on the other side of a barrier of courage.
We are the hands of Mother Nature. There is no seam between us and the will of the planet. We are the technological catalyst species that is going to carry DNA on this planet out into the universe. Not human DNA, all DNA. And long after this planet has collapsed into its star or been absorbed in the expanding shell of a nova, the life that began here, all the life that began here, will be spread throughout the universe. My vision is, I think, biological, not cultural. And I even believe, that the mushroom is you can view the mushroom as the catalyst for this process. That 100,000 years ago there were only monkeys and the mushroom. And human history is a genetic experiment by an extraterrestrial resident in the environment. And I don't know whether the mushroom is a radio or the extraterrestrial itself. When I said this morning that if you understand the DNA as a species, you will take control of your form, I always have the notion that the mushroom has done this. And that's why it touches matter so very lightly. I mean, the mushroom is a very thinly spread mycelial network through a field or a meadow somewhere. The carpophore, what we call the mushroom, is an appurtenance to the sexual process. As Ralph Abraham said one time, it's for sex, thrills, and sunbathing. And that's all it's for. The mushroom is perfectly able to propagate itself by vegetatively growing through the soil. But the mushroom, if we believe it is an entity, it lives in its own imagination. It has gotten so rid of a physical form that all it is a little bit of white stuff in the soil and a raging trip in an unknown dimension, which you can only slice into by allowing it to translocate into your nervous system. And then it continues to give off its experience of itself, which is an immersion in pure imagination. For it, the thought is the fact of the matter. It's as though the mushroom were made of pure light. Ralph mentioned my latest book, and I don't intend to talk about the book particularly, but in the book I quote the only piece of poetry in the whole thing, not written by me. I now see that I seem to have lost it. Oh no, here it comes up. But it relates to this on many, many levels, this question of illusion and the relationship of the self to the real and where the world falls in that equation and the limits of knowledge and all that other good psychedelic stuff that needs to be considered. The quote is from Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, and if you don't know this book, you should. It is without doubt one of the funniest books in the English language, and it takes the form of a very long poem and then the commentary upon this poem. The poem is written by a character that Nabokov creates named John Shade, and the part that I want to call to your attention this evening runs like this. That rare phenomenon, the iridule, when, beautiful and strange, in a bright sky above a mountain range, one opal cloudlet in an oval form reflects the rainbow of a thunderstorm which in a distant valley has been staged, for we are most artistically caged. Now, this is a very strange piece of poetry. This is not like even Wallace Stevens at his most obscure. In the first place, this word, the iridule, you won't find this word in any dictionary. And yet I sensed that this is obviously the word for this phenomenon. I know what he's talking about. I have seen this opal cloudlet in an oval form, which reflects the rainbow of a thunderstorm in a distant place. We're in the realm of mirage, and nature as mirage, and nature as mirrored labyrinth. In the gray of a false dawn, the wave of internal imagery faded away. I rose from where I had been sitting for hours and stretched. The sky was clear, but it was still very early, and stars were still shining dimly in the west. As I stretched and stood up on the flat stone where I had been sitting, I noticed that the line of fog seemed to have grown darker, and now seemed to be churning or rolling in place. I watched very carefully as the rolling line of darkening mist split into two parts, and each of these smaller clouds also divided apart. It took only a minute or so for these changes to be executed, and I was now looking at 4 lens-shaped clouds of the same size, lying in a row and slightly above the horizon, only a half-mile or so away. A wave of excitement swept through me, followed by a wave of definite fear. I was glued to the spot, unable to move, as if in a dream. As I watched, the clouds recoalesced in the same way they had divided apart, taking another few minutes. The symmetry of this dividing and rejoining, and the fact that the smaller clouds were all the same size, lent the performance an eerie air, as if nature herself were suddenly the tool of some unseen organizing agency. As the clouds recoalesced, they seemed to grow even darker and more opaque. As they all became one, the clouds seemed to swirl inward like a tornado or a waterspout, and it flashed into my mind that perhaps it was a waterspout, something I still have never seen. I tried to shout, but no sound came from my fear-constricted throat. The siren sound was gaining pitch, and in fact, everything seemed to be speeding up. The moving cloud was definitely growing larger rapidly, moving straight toward the place where I was. I felt my legs turn to water and sat down, shaking terribly. For the first time, I truly believed in all that had happened to us, and I knew that the flying concrescence was now about to take me. Its details seemed to solidify as it approached. Then it passed directly overhead at an altitude of about 200 feet, banked steeply upward, and was lost from sight over the edge of the slope behind me. In the last moment before it was lost, I completely threw open my senses to it and saw it very clearly. It was a saucer-shaped machine, rotating slowly, with unobtrusive, soft blue and orange lights. As it passed over me, I could see symmetrical indentations on the underside. It was making the whee, whee, whee sound of science fiction flying saucers. My emotions were all in a jumble. At first I was terrified, but the moment I knew that whatever was in the sky was not going to take me, I felt disappointment. I was amazed, and I was trying to remember what I had seen as clearly as possible. Was it real in the naive sense in which that question is asked of UFOs and tables and chairs? No one else saw this thing, as far as I know. I alone was its observer. I believe that had there been other observers, they would have seen essentially what I have reported. But as for real, who can say? I saw this thing go from being a bit of cloud to being a rivet-studded aircraft of some kind. Was it more true to itself as cloud or aircraft? Was it a hallucination?
eyes went to water, and I just sat down, and as it came toward me, I could see orange light, a ring of orange lights on the outside, a ring of soft blue lights on the underside. It was spinning slowly. It was making the whee, whee, whee sound, and it got nearer and nearer and nearer till I could actually see the rivets on the underside of the thing. And then, in the last moment, before I lost it behind the edge of the hill behind me, I saw that it was the end cap of a 1937 Hoover vacuum cleaner, that it was in fact the same end cap that George Adamski had suspended with a nylon thread in his garage and photographed with his Brownie camera to get the 3 balls, the famous UFO with the 3 half spheres on the underside.
Yeah,
well,
classic.
that photograph was later totally debunked. It's as phony as a 3-peckered owl. And I saw it 45 feet in diameter in the skies above the Amazon. And when it was over, I just howled because I realized, this is much more disturbing than a ship from Zeta Reticuli, because this is simultaneously confirmation and disconfirmation. Nobody in their right mind would tell that story, because the story contains within itself the seeds of its own disconfirmation. So there is something which plays with us.
Actually, that's more than you told in True Hallucinations, too. It's interesting.
In the late summer of 1975, Dennis and I decided that the world we were exploring required a wider audience so that some consensus concerning what was going on could be established. To that end, we wrote and published a guide on the method we had developed to cultivate the Stropharia. At the beginning of that little book, I introduced what we had personally learned about the world of the mushroom. The mushroom speaks, and our opinions rest upon what it tells eloquently of itself in the cool night of the mind. I am old, older than thought in your species, which is itself 50 times older than your history. Though I have been on Earth for ages, I am from the stars. My home is no one planet, for many worlds scattered through the shining disk of the galaxy have conditions which allow my spores an opportunity for life. The mushroom which you see is the part of my body given to sex thrills and sunbathing. My true body is a fine network of fibers growing through the soil. These networks may cover acres and may have far more connections than the number in a human brain. My mycelial network is nearly immortal. Only the sudden toxification of a planet or the explosion of its parent star can wipe me out. By means impossible to explain because of certain misconceptions in your model of reality, all my mycelial networks in the galaxy are in hyperlight communication across space and time. The mycelial body is as fragile as a spider's web, but the collective hypermind and memory is a vast historical archive of the career of evolving intelligence on many worlds in our spiral star swarm. Space, you see, is a vast ocean to those hardy life forms that have the ability to reproduce from spores, for spores are covered with the hardest organic substance known. Across the eons of time and space drift many spore-bearing life forms, in suspended animation for millions of years until contact is made with a suitable environment. Few such species are minded. Only myself and my recently evolved near relatives have achieved the hypercommunication mode and memory capacity that makes us leading members of the community of galactic intelligence.
How the hypercommunication mode operates is a secret that will not be given lightly to humanity, but the means should be obvious. It is the occurrence of psilocybin and psilocin in the biosynthetic pathways of my living body that opens for me and my symbiotes the vision screens to many worlds. You as an individual and mankind as a species are on the brink of the formation of a symbiotic relationship with my genetic material that will eventually carry humanity and Earth into the galactic mainstream of the higher civilizations. Since it is not easy for you to recognize other varieties of intelligence around you, your most advanced theories of politics and society have advanced only as far as the notion of collectivism. But beyond the cohesion of the members of the species into a single social organism, there lie richer and even more baroque evolutionary possibilities. Symbiosis is one of these. Symbiosis is a relation of mutual dependence and positive benefits for both of the species involved. Symbiotic relationships between myself and civilized forms of higher animals have been established many times and in many places throughout the long ages of my development. These relationships have been mutually useful. Within my memory is the knowledge of hyperlight drive ships and how to build them. I will trade this knowledge for a free ticket to new worlds around suns less forsaken and nearer galaxy center. To secure an eternal existence down the long river of cosmic time, I again and again offer this agreement to higher beings, and thereby have spread throughout the galaxy over the long millennia. A mycelial network has no organs to move the world, no hands, but higher animals with manipulative abilities can become partners with the star knowledge within me, and if they act in good faith, return both themselves and their humble mushroom teacher to the million worlds all citizens of our star swarm are heir to.
Look what's going on with Santa Claus. First of all, Santa Claus's colors are red and white, the colors of the Amanita muscaria, for sure. Santa Claus lives at the North Pole. What does this mean? It means that Santa Claus lives at the Axis Mundi, where Yggdrasil, the magic world ash of Welsh mythology, has taken root. Santa Claus flies. This is what shamans do. Santa Claus is the master of the reindeer, the animal most associated with the Amanita muscaria. Santa Claus is aided in his work by troops of elves. And what is the work of Santa Claus? To build toys for children. Remember the DMT things saying, look at this, look at this. Well, those were off-duty elves, clearly. So here are all the motifs. And I believe that for children in our culture, that all the Christer stuff is not what Christmas is about. Christmas is about standing in front of the tree on Christmas morning with the gifts arrayed and the twinkling lights on. Well, that tree is the tree that the Amanita muscaria forms its symbiotic relationship to. It's always spruce or pine that it has a mycorrhizal relationship to. So the number of motifs relating Santa Claus to a cult of Amanita muscaria, there's almost nothing but relational motifs there. And yet if you suggest this to people, they just back away in horror, you know.
Something that we always kick around at these things, or I always bring it up in some form, is where do the hallucinations come from? We arrived late last night after a 24-hour trip from Hawaii that was just hell. or as much hell as modern airlines can legally inflict upon it. and got stoned, and then we were laying there, and it always happens when you're cut off from cannabis for long periods like that. That we turn to it; it's 10 times as strong, and the hallucinations were exquisite. And, I've been looking at hallucinations now for 30-some years. And I looked at these last night, and I thought, if someone would ask me what were they like, what would I have to say? And I had said, indescribable. Indescribable. And I looked and looked, and I could look to my heart's content, and they were indescribable. So we always come around to this question, where do the hallucinations come from? And I suppose the unconscious reductionists among us, and I don't mean that they're unconscious, I mean that they unconsciously use reductionism, probably assume that it's some kind of iteration thing, that bits and pieces of everything you've ever seen are rolling in some kind of neurological kaleidoscope that can run forever and just produce this endless download of drifting imagery. But there's a problem with that, because this stuff is too coherent, it means too much, it's too emotionally charged. Well, we have never really rallied as a group to try and locate in our combined opinions the one or several sources of these images. And I think that, and I talked a bit about this last year, but I think this is legitimate perception of thoughts, places, things, times, and objects that either have existed somewhere in the universe, or do exist, or have existed in the minds of beings somewhere, sometime in the universe. In other words, that we have to begin to take seriously the consequences of generalizations like quantum connectivity. In other words, it's one thing to bask in the light of the overarching metaphor, which says everything is connected to everything else. It's quite another thing to say, and so then what are the consequences for me of this? And the answer seems to me to be that the imagination, the inside of our heads, really is the most vast frontier imaginable. You have the Hubble telescope inside of you. You have inside of you an informational gathering instrument that can give you good intelligence about things so immeasurably distant from this point that to state it in numbers and units is meaningless. It's just elsewhere, the elsewhere of the absolute infinity of the plenum of imagination in which apparently beings rise and fall like plankton in the sea. I'm not an abuser. It takes me a long time to assimilate each experience, and I feel, I never have lost my respect for it. I really feel dread is one of the emotions that I always feel as I approach it, because I have no faith that my sails won't be ripped this time. I always make the metaphor, it's like sailing out onto a dark ocean in your little skiff. And, you may view the moon rising serenely over the calm black water, or something the size of a freight train may roar right through your scene and leave you clutching at an oar. And I don't know, astrology is maybe helpful in figuring out when to go and when not to go, but there needs to be a way to figure out when to go and when not to go. Now, your question about the dialogue, I mean this very literally. It speaks to you, you speak to it.
It says things. I don't know how many of you have read the book that my brother and I wrote under pseudonyms called Psilocybin, the Magic Mushroom Grower's Guide. But in the introduction there's a rap which is all about I am old, 50 times older than thought in your species, and I came from the stars. Well, that's verbatim, you know. I just was writing it furiously. And sometimes it's very human. I mean, my approach to it is Hasidic. I rave at it. It raves at me. We argue about what it's going to cough up and what it isn't. And I say, well, look, you know, I'm the grower. You can't hold back on me. And it says, well, but if I showed you the flying saucer for 5 minutes, you would figure out how it works. And I said, well, come through. And my plea to scientists, administrators, and politicians who may be listening to my voice is to look again at psilocybin, to not lump it with the other psychedelics, to realize that it is a phenomenon unto itself, and it has an enormous potential for transforming mankind, not simply transforming the people who take it, but it is like an art movement or a mathematical understanding or a scientific breakthrough. It holds the possibility of transforming the entire society simply by virtue of the information that is coming through. This is a source of gnosis, and the voice of gnosis has been silenced in the Western mind for at least 1,000 years. You can really take a readout on yourself by seeing how would you like things to be. You know, I mean, sometimes my fantasy is I would like to be alone on a starship 10,000 light years from home with all the books in the universe, and I would dress like Captain Ahab, and I would stride around the catwalks inside this echoing starship, and faithful robot slaves would bring me crumbling volumes of ancient lore, which I would say, no, this is a little too Vincent Price. How about... I've told the story about how in the Amazon, when all this stuff was breaking loose, I went through this period where very calmly and deeply and without having any need to tell anyone, I thought, I came to the opinion that I was like enlightened. And it was this very low-key thing. It was all about appropriate behavior. This was the cognitive hallucination that I was having. It was about appropriate behavior. And I had this idea there's an appropriate way to do everything. And if you do it the appropriate way, no energy will be lost. And so you become like superconducting. You become like some kind of super Tai Chi character where you just do things so niftily that there's no problem, whether it's plucking a flower or moving a boulder. And I was told, when you think, sit on the ground. There were all these teachings, and they were very simple. They were things like, sit on the ground, stupid. And, use your fingers. That was a big teaching. Use your fingers. So one of the things I was into was how you wash the pot. We had one pot. It was this little enamel pot. And we would bake it over a fire, and we baked beans and we baked rice and all these terrible things that would get scum on the bottom. And so it was a big deal about drawing lots for who washed the pot. Well, I discovered in my enlightened state that we had been doing it all wrong. And that if you would go down to the water with the pot and take sand and pat it very, very lightly in the bottom, and then say, please, that then all you had to do was pour water into the pot and swish it around and empty it like that, and then when you looked in, it would be like Drano, it would just be blinding white. And I did this several times, and I thought how appropriate a miracle this is. This is a real miracle. I mean, this is just simple stuff. It's totally here and now. It's absolutely Taoist. It's completely, on and on. So then I had a critic in our crowd. And so I thought that I would enlighten the critic by a wordless demonstration of my obvious command of the howling Tao. So I invited the critic to accompany me to the river. And I said, and now notice that I pick up the sand, I pat it into the bottom, I'm not agitating it. I look into the sky and I say, please. And then I put water in it and I swish it around. Voila! I said, is something supposed to happen? And I look and the crud adheres. And then this person says, I pity you. And I would pity you more, but you alarm me. My life is fairly science fiction-y and carries over it this question, which I grapple with all the time, which is, who do you work for? What is going on here? Do you understand what you're doing? And if you don't, who does? And why did they set you marching? Because I can tell what's happening here. We're trying to tinker with something. It's a groping in the dark for a button. We're trying to make something happen by saying words, by setting examples, by empowering people to do certain things. This is the mushrooms program, not mine. I mean, left to myself, I would probably be a hermit, and I'm much too cynical for crusades. But the mushroom isn't. The mushroom is a gung-ho kind of guy, and has this whole vision of man and fungus hand in hand to the stars. And I just say, you just meet the damnedest people out in the fields, and this is one of them. And it's just a matter of shopping around, and finding out what actually sets your knees knocking. What actually makes tears of joy run down your face spontaneously? What actually can make you grovel and plead for mercy? And it is this force, this real invocation of real spirit. It is a dark night of the soul. It is an ecstasy, apotheosis, apokatastasis. It even happens outside of Greek. It is pure challenge met and overcome, pure self-authentication. And in a world where we are just buffeted, used, set against one another, misled, misconstrued, lied to, and controlled, nevertheless, you can just push between the tents of Carnival Row and walk out into the woods, and there you find the spiritual life waiting. There you find the limpid, sophic waters of the Tao that were always there. And it's a matter of courage. Nature loves courage. Nature is an infinitude of doorways opening into authentic being, calling to us with the voice of our ancestors, the spirits of the planet, the time travelers that rove the centuries ahead of us, and who knows what else. The whole fact of being is a palpable, ongoing, continuous miracle. And we know this. We feel it. I'm saying this because I'm glib
but we all know it. That's how I'm able to say it. You know, it is elicited from the group mind. If it weren't in you, I would be incomprehensible. So we form then an understanding, and then we each are strengthened in the private trials of our souls when we go to meet these things, when we try to hammer out a relationship to the ally, when we try to hammer out a relationship to the denizens of our own unconscious. This is life authentically lived.
There is building in global society an increasingly intense expectation of the intervention into human history by UFOs. It is very similar in tone to the build-up of messianic expectation in the Hellenistic world in the several centuries preceding the birth of Christ. The leaders of Roman society may have been caught off guard by the appearance of Christ, but they had no one to blame but themselves, since millions of people in the ancient world were expectantly awaiting some kind of Messiah. So today, science and government pooh-pooh the idea of world contact with the UFOs, while the contact cults grow ever larger and more insistent that contact is about to occur. Imagine, therefore, what you may never have seriously imagined before. Imagine what would happen if the UFOs were to appear. Imagine a spaceship of the Close Encounters of the Third Kind variety suddenly appearing in orbit around the Earth. Television and mass media would carry its image to every man, woman, and child on the planet. Governments would be paralyzed. Science would be helpless to explain where it came from or how it got here. Millenarian hysteria would break out everywhere. The UFO would be hailed as savior and denounced as Antichrist. The end of the world would appear imminent, and all this would occur before the contact was more than a visual image. Then the UFO would begin its revelation. Vast displays of beneficent power can be expected. Perhaps it would mysteriously neutralize all weapons of mass destruction, or it might use some sort of ray to cure all terrestrial cancer. Whatever it does, one may be sure that its actions will be impressive. Its actions will convert millions to the UFO religion in a space of hours. Indeed, its actions will be specifically designed to overwhelm us with the reality of its power and presence. That will close the first stage of the revelation. The second stage will be the teachings. Telepathically imparted, the specifics of the teachings cannot be anticipated, but they will urge love, voluntary simplicity, concern for one another, renunciation of war, perhaps renunciation of the destructive application of science. Whatever the teachings, the UFO will promise immense reward to those who follow them and dire consequences for those who do not. And the teachings will be delivered in so poetically perfect a way, so rich in understanding and appealing nuances, that no one will doubt their origin in a being wise and good and immensely superior to ourselves. The delivery of the teachings will set the stage for the third and last and most shocking phase of the revelation, the departure. The saucer, promising vaguely to return, will simply disappear. The entire process could take less than a month. If this seems a short time, recall that the entire public career of Christ lasted only 3 years. Christ's career occurred in a world where information could move no faster than a horse's gallop. Yet 3 years in one small part of the world was all that was necessary to launch a world religion that was vital for 1,500 years. In a world of electronic communication, the impact of the saucer's arrival, miracles, teaching, and departure would be incalculable. even if it all occurred within a month. The saucer would leave in its wake a science utterly unable to provide any answers to the important questions concerning what had gone on. The vast majority of people would be fanatical converts to the teachings of the saucer, and any institution in opposition to those teachings could expect to be swept away almost overnight. The departure of the UFO would create a sense of abandonment, the agony of which could be expected to echo in the human psyche for centuries. The only panacea would be the religion of the saucer, the religion left behind. Science would be discredited and soon abandoned in favor of 1,000 or more years of exegesis of the Saucerian message. Is it not a familiar pattern in the light of our discussion of Christ and Rome? What will never be said in the wake of such an event, and so must be said now, while there is still time, for all of the above could occur and yet still be deception. A benign deception, designed to save us from our advanced science and infantile ethics, but a deception nevertheless. The saucer, no matter how alien it appears, no matter how advanced its demonstrations of power, is not a vehicle from some other star system. It is the oversoul of humanity up to its oldest trick. If one knows this, one can live through the revelation and the destruction of our scientific world, and yet evade the immense power of this most powerful of all transference phenomenon, and thereby maintain the integrity of one's own soul and spirit. Remember, I am not a debunker of flying saucers or a defender of science. I am a contactee, and this book is the painstakingly told story of my own involvement with the UFOs. I am one of those Vallée has pinpointed as being a carrier of ideas that pave the way for the scenario I have just described. Yet from it all I have learned that there is no religious revelation more satisfying than the hard-won fruits of simple understanding.
Because, ultimately what you're thrown back on is that you are a monkey. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but on the other hand, it's nothing to write out of the equation either. You're a monkey, for God's sake. And yet you're asking to understand the nature of reality. What would you think of a squirrel that ran around with that as a goal? I mean, you would just think, what? Why don't you just bury nuts, make noise in the trees? Well, so now we have particle physicists and quantum physicists, but even they admit that matter has now become so wacky that the grand enterprise of the conquest of reality through reason has revealed that reason has no place in the domain of reality. That reality itself is not reasonable. Rupert was just describing to me a conference he was at with Dennett, the guy who wrote Consciousness Explained. You probably all know that book. And it should have been called Consciousness Explained Away. But anyway, Dennett was saying, I want to get rid of magical matter in the brain. I just believe the brain is this and that and the other thing. I want to get rid of magical matter. Well, there was a quantum physicist there, Stefan Glashow of Harvard, and he said, well, I've got news for you, John. Quantum physics has turned matter into magical material. So now the whole program of saving reason has to be abandoned. The prosecution of the understanding of nature has pushed us to the point where we see that matter itself exceeds rational apprehendability.
So does that mean giving up codifying stuff? I mean,
It gives up the idea. It means giving up the idea of closure.
Yeah.
That there's not
no conclusions.
No conclusions. I was just at a conference where I met all these people from Ecuador, and there was an anthropologist there. Some of you may know this guy, Sparrow Miller, and he lives with the Guarani in Ecuador. And he told me, he said, the amazing thing about the Guarani is that they don't think anything makes sense. That's their official explanation of the universe, is that nothing makes sense.
That's true to me.
And so they are completely at home with that. Consequently, their contribution to epistemology has been vanishingly small. On the other hand, they have a very good time and are quite comfortable with their wives, children,
In other words,
animals.
they don't understand anything.
Why should we understand? Look at us. We wear penis sheaths and paint ourselves blue. You're asking us?
It's not at all clear that we're mapping a generalizable reality. It may be that it's just so huge in there that never do we pass through the same matrix twice. Well, that means you can give up on closure. You can give up on any theory that will ever give you very much of a more than provisional handle on what's going on. And I think this is probably a good step to take, to open ourselves to the freedom that lies beyond culture. Culture is a kind of prison, and the only way that we know to get beyond it is to dissolve its boundaries. Now, you can do that with psychedelics, and then you really explore the baseline of being, or you can dissolve it with travel. But then you dissolve your own cultural programming only to discover you've fitted yourself into somebody else's cultural programming. And this, while, definitely educational, is like a psychedelic drug I'm not that fond of. I do a lot of traveling, but it's not the same thing as replacing space and time with some kind of alternative. That comes from doing the hard work on 5 grams in silent darkness. And really what you see, I think, is the morphogenetic field, the invisible world that holds everything together, the knit of it all, not the knit of matter and light, but the knit of casuistry, of intentionality, of caring, hope, of dream, of thought. And that all is there, but it's been hidden from us for centuries because of the exorcism of the spirit that took place in order to allow science to do business. And that, momentous and ill-considered choice then has made us the inheritors of a tradition of existential emptiness, really. But that has impelled us to go back to the jungles and to recover this thing. It's all of a piece, you see. I mean, these people in the Amazon and whatnot were keeping this cultural flame burning. But these cultures are now all dead. They are either dead or in a state of advanced suspended animation. It's a very strange enterprise. I mean, it's hard to put it across because the thing is, it's real, and we're in the effort, in the habit of thinking that the mind can move unobstructed from one edge of the universe to the other, that there are no secrets. But actually there are secrets. At least these are secrets, and hard to tell. I mean, I tell them, and you hear them, and we seem to have been allowed a cosmic dispensation. But why that is very hard for me to understand. I would have thought that this would have been headline news 20,000 years ago,
right up until the present. Instead, it's very tentative. Apparently, this is very threatening to us. We are not as eager to sail over the edge collectively as we think we are. So then it becomes the function of the shaman, the gadfly, the go-between, to carry information back and forth between these worlds. I'm convinced that if there were no shamanic pipeline, there would be no human life as we know it on this planet. I mean, there could be climaxed animal life. There is no need for this higher order linguistic style of self-reflection to come into being. It's that something is plotted, something is working itself out in us. We are the cells of a much larger body, and like the cells of our own body, it's very hard for us to glimpse the whole pattern, the whole what is happening, and yet we can sense that there is a purpose and there is a pattern. Well, the way you connect the pattern with the lower level is by dissolving the boundaries of the ego and the self into this larger thing, and then it's found to be there, reflective on many levels. It doesn't require a mechanism. Everything is obvious. If things don't appear simple to us, I think it's because we haven't thought about it long enough. Well, so that's sort of a survey of some of this stuff. Thank you very much. We are closing distance with the first moments of true human civilization. You know, when people actually do treat each other with respect, when there actually is a place made for the celebration of human differences, when we actually do feel the suffering of the people around us and respond to that. So without psychedelics and the models that they make possible, hope is, I think, a very, very fragile thing. And that's why I take the position that I do, because I think that we are on the brink of the adventure for which we left the trees and left the African plain. But it's not a sure thing. It rests in our hands, as it always has. I mean, remember that in the last million years, 9 times the ice has moved south from the poles, miles high, pushing before it our ancestors, people wrapped in skin, naked as jaybirds, marginal as can be, no antibiotics, no global weather forecasting, no nothing. And they didn't drop the ball. They survived. They took care of their children and their elderly. They passed the skills and the technologies and the insights and the songs down the long stream of time. Can we do any less? We who have in our hands the power to shape the planet for good or evil, we who can communicate with each other globally in a moment. It would be a pretty sad commentary on the notion of cultural progress and intelligence if they could keep the faith and we can't. So it all went for this. It will all be made clear in the lifetime of most of us. And so I just want to sort of close on that note, invite you to keep the faith, invite you to explore the edges, and to make of yourself a vessel, a conduit for the world-transforming logos that is trying to speak to all of us to create a sane and viable and celebratory world for our children and their children. Thank you very much.
We wish to express our grateful appreciation to the many friends who aided this project. In South America, we were assisted by Michael Lasky, Erica Neatfeld, Sarah Hartley. The Witoto people of La Chorrera and the mission of La Chorrera were most hospitable, the former providing invaluable access to local psychoactive plants. Thank the mushroom. Terence is his own voice. Dennis plays himself. Many effects were recorded on location throughout the world. Thank you, Terence. Thank the book for being a vehicle. Thank the machinery. Thank the weather. Thank the ancestors. Thank the listeners. Thank your lucky stars.
Born into a highly intellectual community, went to highly intellectual school. We read highly intellectual books according to a highly intellectual rule. Don't you know what I used to know? Disappeared on the river like falling snow. Lord above, when it came to love, I was a highly intellectual fool. I found a highly respectable job which paid a highly respectable lump sum. Of my highly respectable friends and I lived in a highly respectable dump. Don't you see what I used to be? Disappeared on the river just flowing free. Lord of strife, when I came to life I was a highly respectable chump. Go down to the river, finally understood. Go down to the river, it can only do you good for nothing good. It can only do you good for nothing good. Stepped into a highly sensational society in my highly sensational shoes. I sang highly sensational songs along with highly sensational you. Just to prove that we still can move, meet me at the river, let's roll that groove. Lord alive, are you here tonight and in a highly sensational mood?
understood. Go down to the river. It can only do you good for nothing good. It can only do you good for nothing good. It can only do you good for nothing good.
We've now reached the 22nd of March, 1971, and I was just, I couldn't talk to anybody. I was in a very, 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 very strange place. I mean, things went on, well, just as an example, because there wasn't much of this 3D stuff that you could wrap your mind around, but everything was teaching me. Everything had a message for me. And I would go out into the jungle, and I would raise my arms above my head, and I would call the butterflies into me out of the jungle, and they would come, first by dozens and then by hundreds. And I would stand there, and here's how the thought progression would go. I would call the butterflies in, and then it would move me to tears. So there I am standing, covered with butterflies, tears of joy streaming down my face, and streaming down my face, and streaming down my face. And finally I begin thinking, so now what? And then I think, the people back at the camp who doubt me, those bastards, wait till they see this. So then I would go to the camp, and I would be smiling, the tiny smile that only Buddhas can manage, and I would invite them into the jungle to see something unannounced. And so they would say, well, I don't know, you're just, all right, we'll go. So then we would go into the jungle, and I would raise my hands above my head, and I would call the butterflies in, and none would come. And these people would just say, oh God, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Your brother is nuts. You have delusions of this is pathetic. I mean, this is a mind in wreckage. This is the green hell. This is the thing we feared the most, you know? And so eventually, and any of you who are self-diagnosed as schizophrenic will agree with me on this, I'm sure. The key to surviving schizophrenia in one piece and avoiding massive intervention by the mental health care authorities is shut up. Shut up about it. Do not talk about it. Of course you can raise the dead and heal the sick and divine distant event, but just shut up about it, or you're not going to make it through. Well, eventually everybody else sort of renegotiated themselves back to some kind of reality. My brother flew back to the States, and I was, in a sense, left in the Amazon to mull all this.
The mushroom once said to me, "This is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars. Not to worry."
Well, they've been speaking to you for a while, haven't they?
Long enough.
Long enough.
In my highest states, I have had the insight, which I will convey to you without saying it's true, that this is the most limited form of existence you will ever know. You can't be deader than this. This is the bottom line. And And so the good news is it's only up from here. Any similarity to persons living or dead is purely coincidental.
Then would you be convinced? Well, look at this!